No one in town remembers how the painting ended up in the gallery, not even the owner, Mrs. Granger. She swears it appeared one morning, hanging in the back room as if it had always been there, its thick frame heavy with dust. At first glance, it looked like any other work of art. A pastoral scene, quiet and serene. A cabin sat nestled between dark, looming trees, and in the distance, the suggestion of mountains shadowed the horizon. But something about it unsettled you the longer you looked at it. The first time I saw the painting, it was already infamous. Rumors swirled about its origins, whispers about how those who spent too much time with it began to change. Of course, I didn't believe any of that at first. I'm not superstitious. I'm a painter myself, an artist, and I've spent years studying the craft. To me, a painting is just paint on canvas, nothing more. But that was before I saw his signature. It was a small mark, almost hidden in the lower corner of the painting, barely visible beneath layers of grime. RF. Those initials meant nothing to most people, but to me, they were unmistakable. I had spent years studying the works of Roland Finch, a reclusive painter who had mysteriously vanished in the early 1900s. His works were rare, but they were legendary among collectors and artists alike for their depth and atmosphere. His paintings were known to evoke powerful emotions, pulling the viewer in like a slow, steady tide. But there was something else about Finch that people often forgot. The stories. Roland Finch wasn't just a genius, he was also said to be accursed. It was a legend in art circles. Supposedly, Finch had made a pact of some kind, though the details varied depending on who told the story. Some said he had made a deal with the devil to create works that would outlast time itself. Others claimed he had stumbled upon forbidden knowledge, something hidden within the layers of reality that he captured in his art. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that anyone who became too involved with Finch's work would slowly go mad. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But as I stood in front of that painting, staring at the cabin, I felt a chill run down my spine. The longer I stared, the more I realized something was off. The shadows around the trees seemed to move subtly, as if the light was shifting, even though the gallery was lit by steady, artificial bulbs. The mountains in the distance, at first, they had seemed faint, distant, but now they felt closer. I blinked and shook my head, stepping back. My hands were clammy, and my heartbeat quickened. "It's unsettling, isn't it?" Mrs. Granger said from behind me, startling me out of my thoughts. She had appeared silently, as she often did, watching me with her usual piercing gaze. "Where did this come from?" I asked, ignoring the pounding in my chest. She shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron as if the question bored her. "No one knows, but people have been coming in just to see it. I suppose that's a good thing. I could use the attention." Her tone was flat, detached, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the painting long enough to question it. I found myself returning to the gallery more often after that, sometimes daily. I couldn't stay away. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I wanted to study Finch's technique. After all, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to examine the work of a master. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Every time I looked at the painting, something had changed. The shadows around the cabin seemed darker, the trees twisted in ways that made my head hurt. I even started seeing faint outlines of figures, lurking at the edge of the frame, almost too faint to notice. One evening, after the gallery had closed, Mrs. Granger offered to let me take the painting home for a while, for inspiration, she said with a strange smile. I should have refused. I should have walked out and never returned. But I didn't. I agreed, thinking that having it in my studio would allow me to dissect it further, to really understand what made it so unsettling. That was the first night I saw the cabin's door open. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. I had the painting set up on an easel in my studio, surrounded by sketches and brushes. I was staring at it, trying to pinpoint what made it so alive, when I noticed the small wooden door of the cabin had cracked open. My breath caught in my throat. I moved closer, studying the brushstrokes, but there was no sign of tampering. No fresh paint, no indication that it had been altered. The door was simply open. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of Roland Finch, of the painting, of the figures I had seen moving just at the edge of the canvas. I dreamed of the cabin, standing before it in a clearing that was unnaturally quiet. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted like claws. In the dream, I walked toward the cabin, my feet moving against my will. The door creaked open wider as I approached. revealing nothing but a yawning blackness inside. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat. The image of the cabin door burned into my mind. The next few days were a blur. I spent hours in front of the painting, barely eating or sleeping. The figures at the edges of the frame became more defined. They were people, twisted, distorted figures, their faces hidden in shadow. And the door, every time I looked, it seemed a little wider, as if inviting me in. It wasn't until a week later, when Emma, my girlfriend, came by to check on me, that I realized how far I had fallen. She found me sitting in the dark, staring at the painting, mumbling to myself about the door, about how it was waiting for me. "You look like hell," she said, shaking me out of my trance. "You need to get out of here. This thing is messing with your head." I tried to argue, but deep down, I knew she was right. I hadn't been thinking clearly. The painting was doing something to me, something I couldn't explain. We decided to return it to the gallery the next day. But that night, the dreams came back. This time, I wasn't just standing outside the cabin. I was inside. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls pulsed as if they were alive. Something moved in the darkness ahead of me, a shape that slithered just out of sight. I woke up screaming, but when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in bed. I was standing in front of the painting. The door was wide open now, and inside the cabin, I could see a staircase spiraling down into the earth. At the foot of the stairs stood a figure, barely visible, but I could feel its eyes on me. That was the last night I saw Emma. She disappeared the next day. I don't know what happened. She was supposed to meet me at the gallery to return the painting, but she never showed up. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and when I went to her apartment, it was empty, as if she had never lived there at all. The police didn't find anything, not a trace of her. It was like she had been erased from existence. Now the painting is all I have left. I can't bring myself to get rid of it. I've tried. I've thrown it in the trash, burned it, even left it in an empty field miles from my home. But every time, it comes back, hanging in my studio as if it had never left. The door is open wide now, and I know it's waiting for me. There are nights when I hear footsteps coming from the canvas, soft at first, but growing louder as they draw nearer. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, shadowy figures slipping between the trees, watching, waiting. I know what they want. Soon, I'll have no choice but to follow them, to step through the door and descend into whatever hell Roland Finch captured in his cursed brushstrokes. And when I do, I wonder if I'll ever come back.